Commerce Alive today presents
Pontiac. The Oakland Motor Car Company was founded in 1907 in Pontiac, Michigan, by Edward Murphy, a manufacturer of horse-drawn carriages. The following year, another former buggy company executive, William C. Durant, founded GM in Flint, Michigan, as a holding company for the Buick Motor Company. GM soon bought other automakers, including Oldsmobile and Cadillac. In 1909, Oakland became part of GM. The first model made its debut as the Oakland 4 from 1909 until it was replaced by the Oakland 6 in 1916. In 1926 the Pontiac Series 6-27 was introduced as a junior brand to Oakland, which featured a six-cylinder engine. The Pontiac was more popular than the senior brand and became its own GM division when Oakland was cancelled in 1931. It was named after the famous Odawa chief, who had also given his name to the city of Pontiac, Michigan, where the car was produced. Within months of its introduction, Pontiac was outselling Oakland. Body styles offered included a sedan with both 2 and 4 doors, Landau Coupe, with the Sport Phaeton, Sport Landau Sedan, Sport Cabriolet, and Sport Roadster. As a result of Pontiac's rising sales, versus Oakland's declining sales, Pontiac became the only companion marque to survive its parent, with Oakland folded in 1932. Pontiacs were also manufactured from knockdown kits at GM's Japanese factory at Osaka Assembly in Osaka, Japan, from 1927 until 1941. Pontiac produced cars offering 40 horsepower, 186.7 cu in L-head straight, six-cylinder engines in the Pontiac Series 6-27 of 1927. Its stroke was the shortest of any American car in the industry at the time. The Series 6-27 sold 39,000 units within 6 months of its appearance at the 1926 New York Auto Salon, hitting 76,742 in 1 year. In 1928, it became the top-selling six-cylinder car in the U.S., as well as ranking 7th in sales. When the crash of 1929 occurred, both Pontiac and Oakland sales dropped dramatically and Oakland was gone. 1932 was the first year for the Pontiac Series 302 V8. The 1932 V8 had an over-square bore and stroke of 3.4375 in x 3.375 in, displacing 251 cu in with a compression ratio of 5.2:1. Horsepower was rated at 85 horsepower at 3,200 rpm using 3 main bearings, solid valve lifters and a Marvel one-barrel carburetor. Unusually, Pontiac switched to the straight 8 for 1933 until it was replaced in 1954. As the economy began to recover, by 1933, Pontiac had moved up to producing the least expensive cars available with straight 8 engines. This was achieved by using many components from the six-cylinder Chevrolet Master, such as the body. The Pontiacs were differentiated by a large chrome strip on the top and center of the front hood that Pontiac called the Silver Streak. Only 8-cylinder engines were offered in 1933 and 1934, displacing 223.4 cu in, rated at 77 horsepower. In 1935, Pontiac shared the torpedo body appearance with the LaSalle and the Cadillac Series 60, just prior to its being used by Chevrolet, earning some media attention for the marque. At the 1939 New York World's Fair, a 1939 Deluxe 6 was displayed with body panels made entirely from plexiglass. An unusual feature of the torpedo-bodied exhibition car was that, with the push of a button, the front half of the body would open, showing the engine and the car's front seat interior. A major change occurred in 1937, when all Pontiac models except the new station wagon began using the all-steel B-body shared with Oldsmobile, LaSalle, and small Buicks. A new stronger X-frame had a Hotchkiss drive using a 2-part drive shaft. The 8-cylinder had a 122-inch wheelbase, while the 6-cylinder had a 117-inch wheelbase. Both engines increased displacements, with the 6 going to 222.7 cu in producing 85 horsepower and the 8 to 248.9 cu in rated at 100 horsepower. From 1940 through 1942, the Pontiac Torpedo was the brand's only model built on 3 different bodies: the body shared with Chevrolet, the B body shared with Oldsmobile and Buick, and the C body shared with the large Oldsmobile, Buick, and the small Cadillac. It shared some appearances with the Opel Capitan. In 1941 the Pontiac Streamliner appeared with a straight 8 engine, and on February 2, 1942, the last civilian Pontiac automobile was manufactured in the United States, as all automobile factories converted to military production. The pre-war through the early 1950s Pontiacs were not powerful, as they featured the heavy and long Pontiac straight 8 engine, which was less expensive to produce than the increasingly popular V8s. Their long crankshafts suffered from excessive flex, thus limiting them to a low compression ratio with a modest redline. From 1946 until 1948, all Pontiac models were essentially 1942 models with minor changes. The Hydromatic automatic transmission was introduced in 1948 and helped Pontiac sales grow, even though their cars, torpedoes, and streamliners were becoming out of date. The first all-new Pontiac models appeared in 1949. They incorporated styling cues such as lower body lines and rear fenders that were integrated into the rear-end styling of the car. The Chieftain line was introduced to replace the Torpedo. Built on the GM B-body platform, the Chieftain featured different styling from the Streamliner. In 1950, the Catalina pillarless hardtop coupe was introduced as a Halo model, similar to the Chevrolet Bel Air of the same year. In 1952, Pontiac discontinued the Streamliner and replaced it with additional models in the Chieftain line built on the GM A-body platform. This single model line continued until 1954, when the Star Chief was added. The Star Chief featured a 11-inch stretch to the A-body, giving it a 124-inch wheelbase. The 1953 models were the first to have one-piece windshields instead of the previous two-piece units. While the 1953 and 1954 models were heavily reworked versions of the 1949-52 Chieftain models, they were engineered for the V8 engine that was supposed to be introduced on the 1953 models, but the Buick division complained to GM's management that the introduction might take sales away because Buick was introducing the new Nailhead V8 in 1953. In 1954, Pontiac continued to build upon the design and engineering of their vehicles, which had seen significant updates in previous years. While the 1953 and 1954 models were reworked versions of the 1949-1952 Chieftain models. The year 1954 brought a unique marketing strategy to the forefront. Pontiac introduced an advertising campaign that featured striking prints depicting the impressive feats of Native American tribes. These prints showcased various aspects of tribal life, from awe-inspiring acts of construction to hunting and other means of survival. The campaign not only highlighted the rich heritage and craftsmanship of Native American cultures but also added an element of cultural resonance to the Pontiac brand, creating a unique and memorable connection with potential customers. Completely new bodies and chassis were introduced for the 1955 model year and sales increased. A new 173 horsepower overhead valve Stratostreak V8 engine was introduced. With the introduction of this V8, the 6-cylinder engines were discontinued. A 6-cylinder would not return to the full-size Pontiac line until the GM corporate downsizing of 1977. In 1956, when Seaman Bunky Knudsen became general manager of Pontiac, alongside new heads of engineering, E.M. Estes and John DeLorean, Knudsen began reworking the brand's image. One of the first steps involved the removal of the silver streaks from the hood and deck lid, which were a traditional styling feature beginning in 1933. These were eliminated from the 1957 models just weeks before they were introduced. The first Bonneville was also introduced. This was a version of the Star Chief convertible to showcase Pontiac's first fuel-injected engine. About 630 Bonnevilles were built in 1957. Pontiac marketing described it as America's #1 road car. The following year, the Bonneville became its own line, built on the 122-inch, 3,100 mm, wheelbase of the A-body platform. A 1958 Tri-Power Bonneville was the pace car for that year's Indianapolis 500. The 1958 model year was final use of the Indian motif throughout the vehicle. The only exception would be the Indian head high beam indicator light in the instrument cluster. All 1958 models featured ball joint front suspension replacing the previous kingpin design. With the 1959 model year, Pontiac came out with its arrowhead emblem, with the star design in the middle. The arrowhead design ran all the way up the hood from between the split grille. And on Star Chief models, had 8 chrome stars from the emblem design on the body sides as chrome trim. Knudsen directed that the Pontiacs received a completely reworked chassis, body, and interior styling. Quad headlamps, as well as a longer, lower body, were some of the styling changes. The Chieftain line was renamed Catalina. The Star Chief was downgraded to replace the discontinued Super Chief series and for the first time did not have a 2-door hardtop, only a 2-door sedan along with a 4-door hardtop and 4-door sedan. In addition, there was no Star Chief wagon. The Bonneville was now the top of the line, coming in 3 body styles, a 2-door hardtop, a 4-door hardtop, and a 4-door station wagon. The Star Chief's 4-door Vista hardtop was also shared by the Bonneville. Catalina models included a 2-door hardtop, 2-door sedan, 4-door sedan, and 4-door hardtop as well as 2 station wagons, a 6-passenger with 2 rows of seats, and a 9-passenger version with a rear-facing 3rd row. Bonneville and Star Chief were built on a 124-inch wheelbase with the exception of the Bonneville wagon, and all Catalina models and the Bonneville wagon rode on a 122-inch wheelbase. Catalina was also 7 inches shorter than Bonneville and Star Chief and weighed 100 to 200 pounds less than its long wheelbase counterparts. All 1959 Pontiacs were equipped with a 389 cu in V8 engine with horsepower ratings from 215 horsepower to a 345 horsepower, tri-power, carbureted version. All automatics were 4-speed super hydramatics or, as the Hydromatic division that designed and built them called them, controlled coupling hydromatic. Oldsmobile used this same transmission and called it Jetaway hydromatic. Cadillac also used it and called it 315 or P315 hydromatic. A 3-speed, column-mounted stick shift was standard on all Pontiacs. This coincided with major body styling changes across all models that introduced increased glass area, twin V-shaped fins, and lower hood profiles. Motor Trend magazine selected Pontiac as the 1959 car of the year. The 1959s featured a 5-inch wider track. The increase to 64-inch was because Knudsen noticed the new, wider bodies looked awkward on the carried-over 1958 frames. The 1960 models had a complete reskinning with the exception of the body's canopies, which remained identical to the 1959s, but removed the tail fins and the distinctive split grille. The 1960 model standard engine had a power gain of 3 horsepower due to a compression increase of 0.25. The Ventura was introduced, and a more luxurious hardtop coupe with the 4-door hardtop built on the shorter 122-inch wheelbase platform, thus positioned between the Catalina and Star Chief models. The Ventura featured the luxury features of the Bonneville in the shorter, lighter Catalina body. Most of Pontiac's models built during the 1960s and 1970s were either styled like or were siblings with other GM makes. Pontiac retained its own front and rear-end styling, interiors, and engines. The 1961 models were restyled. The split grille returned, as well as all new bodies and a new design of a perimeter frame chassis for all its full-size models. something which would be adopted for all of GM's intermediate-sized cars in 1964, and all its full-sized cars in 1965. These new chassis allowed for reduced weight and smaller body sizes. The similarly styled Chevrolet still used the X frame from the early 1960s. All three BOP cars were unibody, dubbed the Y-body platform, combining the frame and body into a single construction, making them comparatively lighter and smaller. All three put into production new technology pushed by John DeLorean, on which GM had been working for several years prior, but the Tempest was by far the most radical. A flexible steel shaft rotating at the speed of the engine delivered power from the front-mounted engine through a torque tube to a rear-mounted transaxle. This provided close to a 50-50 front-rear weight distribution that improved handling as well as incorporated four-wheel independent suspension. The design almost eliminated the large floor hump common to front-engined rear-drive cars. Though the Tempest's transaxle was similar to the one in the Corvair, introduced the year before, it shared essentially no common parts. GM had planned to launch a Pontiac version of the Corvair, but Bunky Knudsen, whose niece had been seriously injured in a Corvair crash, successfully argued against the idea. The Polaris design apparently made it to full-scale clay before it was cancelled. Instead, DeLorean's rope shaft design was green-lighted. The Tempest won the Motor Trend Car of the Year award in 1961. Toward the end of 1961, an upscale version of the Tempest called the Lemons was introduced. The Tempest featured a 194.5 cu in inline slant four-cylinder engine, derived from the right bank of Pontiac's 389 V8, enabling it to be run down the same production line and reducing costs. The engine received a crankshaft designed for 4 cylinders, but this did not completely solve its balance issues. The engine gained the nickname Hay Baler because of its tendency to kick violently, like the farm machine. An optional Buick 215 cu in V8 was not popular when it was available for 1961 and 1962 in the Tempest. For 1963, Pontiac replaced it with a new 326 that was actually 336 cu in V8 with a bore of 3.78 and stroke of 3.75. It was based and shared parts with the 389, but an altered, reduced bore. The car's body and suspension were also changed to be lower, longer, and wider. The response was that more than half of the 1963 Tempests and Lemons were ordered with the V8. The next year, the 326 became a true 326 with a new bore size of 3.72. The Tempest's popularity helped move Pontiac into third place among American car brands in 1962, a position Pontiac would hold through 1970. In November 1961, Knudsen moved to Chevrolet. Pete Estes now became general manager of Pontiac and DeLorean was promoted to Pontiac chief engineer. Both continued Knudsen's work of making Pontiac a performance car brand. Pontiac capitalized on the emerging trend toward sportier bucket seat coupes in 1962 by introducing the Grand Prix, taking the place of the Ventura, which now became a trim option on the Catalina. Although GM officially ended factory support for all racing activities across all of its brands in January 1963, Pontiac continued making larger engines with more power available across all model lines. For 1963, the Grand Prix received the same styling changes as other full-sized Pontiacs, such as vertical headlights and new body lines with a squared-off roofline with a concave rear window, along with less chrome. The concave rear window was replicated on Tempest/Lemons four-door intermediates in 1964 and 1965. For 1964, the Tempest and Lemons transaxle design was dropped and the cars were redesigned under GM's new A-body platform, frame cars with a conventional front-engined, rear-wheel drive layout. The most important of these is the GTO. In spite of a GM unwritten edict against engines larger than 330 cu in intermediate cars, DeLorean, came up with the idea to offer the GTO as an option package that included a 389 cu engine rated at 325 or 348 horsepower. The entire Pontiac lineup was selected as Motor Trend's Car of the Year for 1965, the third time Pontiac received this recognition. The February 1965 issue of Motor Trend was almost entirely devoted to Pontiac's Car of the Year award and included feature stories on the division's marketing, styling, engineering, and performance efforts along with road tests of several models. The GTO was split from being an option on the Tempest Lemon series to becoming a separate GTO series. The 1966 model year saw the introduction of a completely new overhead camshaft, OHC, six-cylinder engine in the Tempest. The 1962 Jeep Tornado engine was the first post-World War II U.S.-designed mass-produced OHC engine, while the Pontiac OHC i6 was available in popular-priced domestic cars. In an industry first, plastic grills were used on several models. The 1967 model year saw the introduction of the Pontiac Firebird Pony car, a variant of the Chevrolet Camaro. Intermediate-sized cars were mildly facelifted, but all full-size cars and GTO lost their tri-power engine option, though they did get a larger 400 cu in, 6.6L, V8 that replaced the previous 389. Full-sized cars got a major facelift with rounder wasp-waisted body lines, a name change for the midline series from Star Chief to Executive, as well as a one-year-only Grand Prix convertible. 1968 introduced the Endura rubber front bumper on the GTO, the precursor to modern cars' integrated bumpers, and the first of a series of Ram Air engines, which featured the induction of cold air to the carburetor for more power. The tri-carburetor deletion came from the 14th floor of GM banning multiple carburations and was headed by GM President Ed Cole. The Ram Air V option was not popular. Full-sized cars and intermediates reverted from vertical to horizontal headlights, while the 2.2 was dropped from the lineup. For 1969, Pontiac moved the Grand Prix from the full-sized lineup into a G-body model of its own based on the A-body intermediate four-door modified from 116 in to 118 in wheelbase chassis, but with different styling and long hood/short deck proportions to compete in the intermediate-sized personal luxury car segment. Pete Estes, who like Knudsen had moved to be general manager of Chevrolet in 1966, and DeLorean, general manager of the Pontiac division, needed a car to take the place of the sagging sails of the full-size Grand Prix, but the development cost of the car was too much of a burden for Pontiac division alone. So DeLorean went to his old boss at Chevrolet to gather support for the development cost of the new G-body Grand Prix. Estes agreed to share in the cost and allow Pontiac to have a one-year exclusivity on this new car. The next year Chevy would follow with its version, which was called Chevrolet Monte Carlo. The new Grand Prix was such a sales success in 1969 as dealers moved 112,000 units, more than 4 times the number of Grand Prix sold in 1968. Full-sized Pontiacs were also restyled but retained the same basic underbody structure and chassis that debuted with the 1965 model. The rooflines for the four-door pillared sedans and safari wagons were the same as the 1965 models, while the two-door semi-fastback design gave way to a squared-off notchback style, and four-door hardtop sedans were also more squared-off than 1967 and 1968 models. The GTOs and Firebirds received the Ram Air option. The GTO saw the addition of the Judge Performance/Appearance package, and the Firebird also got the Trans AM package. Although originally conceived as a 303 cu in model to compete in the Trans AM racing series, in a cost-saving move the Pontiac Trans AM debuted with the standard 400 cu in engines. This year also saw DeLorean leaving the post of general manager to accept a similar position at GM's Chevrolet division. His replacement was F. James McDonald. Pontiacs built in the late 1960s conformed to new U.S. federal motor vehicle safety standards. These included energy-absorbing interior parts such as steering columns, steering wheels, knobs and handles, dual-circuit hydraulic brake systems, shoulder belts, side marker lights, and headrests. The 1969 Firebirds received a heavy facelift but otherwise continued much the same as the original 1967 model. It was the final year for the overhead cam 6-cylinder engine in Firebirds and Intermediates, and the Firebird convertible until 1991. Production of the 1969 Firebirds was extended into the first 3 months of the 1970 model year. All other 1970 Pontiacs debuted September 18, 1969 due to a decision to delay the introduction of an all-new 1970 Firebird and Chevrolet Camaro until February 26, 1970. In addition, in the late 1960s, GM directed their GM and Pontiac divisions to develop concept mini-cars called commuter cars for urban drivers. GM developed a gasoline-electric drive hybrid, the XP833, and the Pontiac X4, a rear-wheel drive mid-engine car that was powered by a radical X-shaped aircraft-type air-cooled two-stroke radial engine where the standard crankshaft was replaced by a unit called a Scotch yoke. While the GM car was fully tested, the Pontiac concept was not. Neither was placed in production. Increasing insurance and fuel costs for owners decreased demand for muscle cars, along with federal emissions and safety regulations, put an end to the unrestricted, powerful engines of the 1960s. Safety, luxury, and economy would become the new watchwords of this decade. Engine performance began declining in 1971 when GM mandated that all engines be capable of using lower-octane unleaded gasoline, which led to drops in compression ratios, along with performance and fuel economy. This, coupled with trying to build cars as plush as GM's more luxurious Buicks and Oldsmobiles, contributed to the start of Pontiac's slow decline from its late 1960s highs. In mid-1971, Pontiac introduced the compact, budget-priced Ventura II based on the third-generation Chevrolet Nova. This same year, Pontiac completely revamped its full-size car lineup. The flagship Bonneville was replaced with the more opulent Grandville, while a new generation of full-size safari station wagons was introduced. These wagons featured a new tailgate known as a clamshell design. Rather than swing upward or outward, the steel portion of the tailgate lowered into the body below the cargo floor and the rear window raised into the roof. The design featured a power-operated glass and either a manual or power-assist tailgate. The power tailgate, the first in station wagon history, ultimately supplanted the manual tailgate, which required marked effort to lift from storage. The 1972 models saw the first wave of emissions reduction and safety equipment and updates. GTO was a now sub-series of the Lemons. The Tempest was discontinued, after being renamed T37 and GT37 for 1971. The base 1972 mid-sized Pontiac was now called Lemons. James McDonald left the post of general manager to be replaced by Martin J. Caserio in late 1972. Caserio was the first manager in over a decade to be more focused on marketing and sales than on performance. For 1973, Pontiac followed suit with the rest of the General Motors divisions and introduced their variants of the all-new GM body, known as the Colonnade style due to the roof treatment's pillared look. Body Pontiac models included the mid-sized Lemons and all-new Grand AM as part of the Lemons line. The compact Ventura and personal luxury Grand Prix were also restyled for 1973. Other models, including the big cars and Firebirds, received only minor updates. Again, power dropped across all engines as more emissions requirements came into effect. The 1973 Firebird Trans Am's factory-applied hood decal, a John Chanella stylized interpretation of Native American bird designs, took up most of the available space on the hood. Also in 1973, the new Super Duty 455 engine, Super Duty, harkening back to Pontiac's racing engines, was introduced. Although it was originally to be available in GTOs and Firebirds, only a few SD455 engines made it into Firebird Trans Ams that year. One so equipped was tested by Car and Driver magazine, which proclaimed it the last of the fast cars. The SD455 was available for one more year in the Trans Am. As emissions regulations were increasing, two of the three iterations of the 455 cu in engine were discontinued after 1974, with the final version of the 455 remaining available through 1976. For 1975, Pontiac introduced the new subcompact Aster, a version of the Chevrolet Vega. This was the brand's entry into the fuel economy segment of the market. Aster had been sold exclusively in Canada since 1973. It was offered through the 1977 model year. 1975 would also be the end of Pontiac convertibles for the next decade. The 1976 models were the last of the traditional American large cars powered by mostly big-block V8 engines. After this year, all GM full-size models would go through downsizing and shrink in length, width, weight, and available engine size. The 1976 Sunbird, based on the Chevrolet Vega and Monza's equivalent, joined the line. It was first offered as a notchback, with a hatchback body style added in 1977. The Vega wagon body style was added in 1978, Sunbird Safari Wagon, replacing the Aster Safari Wagon. The Sunbird was offered in its rear-wheel drive configuration through the 1980 model year. For the 1977 model year, the full-sized Pontiacs received the same downsizing as GM's other B-body cars. The Grandville was dropped, but the new Bonnevilles and Catalinas continued to be bestsellers, although their styling shared more similarity to the Chevrolet Caprice than ever before. In mid-year 1977, Pontiac introduced the Phoenix, an upscale version of the Ventura which replaced the Ventura entirely after the end of the 1977 model year. Pontiac also introduced its 151 cu in Iron Duke 4-cylinder overhead valve engine. It was first used in the 1977 Aster, replacing Aster's aluminum block 140 cu in Vega engine. The Iron Duke engine would later go into many GM and non-GM automobiles into the early 1990s. The 151 cubic inch I4 and the 301 cu in V8 were the last two engines designed solely by Pontiac. Subsequent engine design would be accomplished by one central office with all designs being shared by each brand. The remainder of the 1970s and the early 1980s saw luxury, safety, and economy becoming ever more important selling points in Pontiac products. Wire-spoked wheel covers returned for the first time since the 1930s. More station wagons than ever were being offered. Padded vinyl roofs were options on almost every model. Rear-wheel drive began its slow demise with the introduction of the first front-wheel drive Pontiac, the 1980 Phoenix, a version of the Chevrolet Citation. The Firebird was successfully marketed by product placement in the Smokey and the Bandit film and the Rockford Files TV show. The Firebird was available with Formula and Trans Am packages, and a turbocharged V8, a Pontiac first, was also available for the 1980 and 1981 model years. Introduced in 1982, the wedge-shaped Firebird was introduced, marking the first major redesign of the pony car since 1970. Embedded marketing in the television series Knight Rider was successful. Pontiac introduced more performance-oriented models over the next decade. The Trans Am also set a production aerodynamic mark of .32 CD. A convertible body style was reintroduced after 9 years. GM adapted the J-body cars, and the all-new 1982 J2000 later renamed Sunbird had a convertible as part of its line. The 1984 Fiero was a major departure from anything Pontiac had produced in the past. A two-seat, mid-engined coupe. The Fiero was partially responsible for Pontiac seeing its first increase in sales in 4 years. Pontiac also began to focus on technology. In 1984, a special touring edition was added to the 6000 line as a competitor to European road cars such as the Mercedes 190. The STE sported digital instruments and other electronics as well as a more powerful V6 and retuned suspension. Later iterations would see some of the first introductions on Pontiacs of anti-lock brakes, steering wheel-mounted radio controls, and other features. Pontiac imported the Canadian market Pontiac Parisienne, which featured the Bonneville's deluxe trim. This car, although a Pontiac in name, was no more than a slightly retrimmed Caprice. The Parisienne sold in profitable numbers and this car continued in production until 1986 for the sedan, and 1989 for the Safari station wagon. With the exception of the Parisienne Safari, the Firebird, and Fiero, beginning in 1988 all Pontiacs, with the exception of the Firebird, switched to front-wheel drive platforms. For the first time since 1970, Pontiac was the number 3 domestic car maker in America. The median age of Pontiac owners dropped from 46 in 1981 to 38 in 1988. Pontiac's introduction included anti-lock brakes, GM's Quad 4 engine, airbags, and composite materials. Safari station wagon production ended in 1989, the last V8, powered full-sized, rear-wheel drive Pontiac until the 2009 G8. The 1990 model year saw the launch of Pontiac's first minivan and light truck, the Trans Sport. In addition, the Grand Prix line added its first-ever 4-door model, offered in LE and STE trims. At the end of the 1991 model year, the 6000 was discontinued in favor of the newly expanded Grand Prix lineup and the new Trans Sport minivan, which replaced the 6000 station wagon. In 1992, a brand new Bonneville was introduced. This full-size model featured aerodynamic styling, large expanses of curved glass, front-wheel drive, and the 3800 series IV6 as standard equipment. A new submodel, the SSEI, was introduced in 1992 carrying all standard equipment from the SSE model, plus the 205 horsepower supercharged 3800 V6. For 1993, the Bonneville added a new option package called the Sport Luxury Edition, which was available on the SE model. This package included leather bucket seats, a specific grille, side trim, exhaust, dash trim, lace-styled alloy wheels, as well as a rear spoiler, sport handling suspension systems, and anti-lock brakes. An all-new Firebird was introduced in 1993. It was powered by either a 3.4L V6 with 160 horsepower, or in Trans Am guise a 275 horsepower LT1. A 350 cu in V8, and could be backed by a T56 6-speed manual. The Sunbird was replaced with the still J-body Sunfire in 1995. While a V6 engine was no longer available in the J-car, sedan, coupe, and convertible body styles did survive. For 1996 the Bonneville received updated front and rear fascias along with several other enhancements. The 3800 Series 2 V6 had become standard in 1995, featuring 205 horsepower. The updated supercharged 3800 Series 2 was now rated at 240 horsepower. The 1996 model year was the last year for the 5th generation Grand Prix. The Grand Prix debuted in 1997 with the "Wider is Better" advertising campaign. The GTP trim level was added to the Grand Prix. It featured a supercharged 3.8L V6 rated at 240 horsepower and 280 lb-ft of torque. One design highlight of this generation Grand Prix is the sharing of the roof's sheet metal between both coupe and sedan models. In 1998 the Firebird was updated. The Trans Am received the LS1 engine which produced 305 horsepower. The WS6 option saw this number increase to 320 horsepower and the addition of ram air and stiffer springs. The 1999 model year saw the replacement of the Trans Sport with the larger Montana minivan. In 2000, the Bonneville received the first major redesign since 1992 and was based on the G-body, shared with the Oldsmobile Aurora and Buick LeSabre. In 2001, Pontiac introduced the Aztek into the emerging SUV market segment. In 2002, both the Firebird/Trans Am and Camaro were discontinued as a result of declining sales and a saturated sports market. The coupe version of the Grand Prix was also discontinued. The 2003 Vibe arrived in spring 2002, a Toyota-based compact wagon built at the NUMMI joint venture plant. Also, in 2003, it was announced that the Grand Prix would be in the last year of its generation, with an improved 7th generation on the way for 2004. It would also be Pontiac's final year in NASCAR. Pontiac's final victory in the NASCAR Cup Series would be achieved by Ricky Craven in one of the closest finishes in NASCAR history, with David Green scoring their last second-tier series win at the Mr. Goodsense 300 at Kansas Speedway. A few surplus Pontiacs continued running in the Busch Series through 2005, in the ARCA Racing Series through 2007, with factory support in the NASCAR Canadian Tire Series from 2007 to 2009, and in the NASCAR Whelen Modified Tour as late as 2016. The 2004 model year saw the reintroduction of the Pontiac GTO based on the Australian-developed Holden Monaro. The GTO was also initially powered by the 350 horsepower LS1 V8 in its first model year. It had an independent front and rear suspension and an upscale full-leather interior. Sales did not reach the 18,000 units that GM predicted. The LS1 engine was dropped in 2004. Pontiac added the drive-by-wire 400 horsepower LS2 V8 for the 2005 and 2006 model years at no additional cost. Additional upgrades also consisted of stainless steel dual exhaust outlets, larger Corvette-sourced PBR brakes with EBD, larger front vented rotors with vented rear rotors, and functional heat extractor hood scoops. The Bonneville introduced the GXP trim level to replace the SSEI. The Bonneville GXP featured a 4.6 Northstar V8, borrowed from Cadillac, and replaced the supercharged 3800 Series 2. The redesigned Grand Prix made its appearance and featured a GT and GTP trim level. The GTP's new 3.8L supercharged V6 now made 260 horsepower, up 20 from the previous generation. TA shift was also introduced as well as a competition group package. In 2005, the Sunfire was discontinued and replaced by the new Pontiac Pursuit. Initially, Pontiac did not plan on offering the G5 in the United States, however, dealer pressure to fill the gap left by the discontinuation of the Sunfire caused Pontiac to introduce only the coupe variation into the U.S. The four-door sedan version was available in Canada as the Pursuit throughout the model run. The high-performance GXP trim was introduced in the Grand Prix line in 2005, adding GM's LS4 V8 rated at 303 horsepower and 323 lb-ft of torque. This engine was built to give buyers a V8 sedan option until the all-new G8 arrived in 2008. In 2008, the Grand Prix ended production, and the launch of the Australian-built RWD G8 commenced. The G8 gained positive reception for its high performance and low costs. Many noted the G8 as the poor man's BMW M5 due to its similar performance at a much lower price. The G8 GXP was the most powerful production car Pontiac had ever built and is regarded as the best driver's car ever to wear the Pontiac badge. The Holden Ute was scheduled to launch as the G8 ST before being cancelled in January 2009 due to GM's financial situation. It was later announced that the G8 may not see a second generation. Towards the end of the decade, many rumors began spreading that Pontiac would become reliant on RWD. Reports ranged from a compact sedan based on the Alpha platform to a new RWD G6 for the 2013 model year. Many reports suggested that the Trans Am/Firebird would return after GM confirmed the rebirth of the Camaro. However, no official company statements confirmed these. On December 2, 2008, General Motors eliminated numerous brands, including Pontiac, to appease Congress with the objective of receiving a $25 billion loan from the government. On February 17, 2009, GM proposed the sale or elimination of its Saturn division, the sale of Saab, and either the sale or elimination of Hummer, depending on whether a buyer could be found quickly. GM clarified that Pontiac would have begun to focus on niche models aimed at the youthful and sporty segment, but did not provide specifics. Pontiac was to trim its number of models to 4. However, there were discussions of retaining only one model. By April 2009, several automotive websites and business publications were reporting that GM was doing a study suggesting it might eliminate the brand, along with sister truck brand GMC. On April 23, a report was published stating the company dropped the Pontiac brand while preserving the GMC truck line, and the Chevrolet, Cadillac, and Buick brands. The decision to dissolve Pontiac was made primarily due to the increasing threat of a bankruptcy filing if the June 1 deadline could not be met. The company dropped the Pontiac automobile and phased out all of its remaining models in 2010. Though both production and franchise agreements ended in 2010, Pontiac remains a registered and active trademark of GM for licensing purposes. General Motors would eliminate an additional 7,000 to 8,000 factory jobs in the United States and shed 2,600 dealers by 2010 under a revised business plan. GM Chief Executive Officer Fritz Henderson said the Pontiac brand would be closed by 2010, calling it an extremely personal decision. In addition to speeding up decisions on Saturn, Saab, and Hummer, GM would be left with 4 brands: Chevrolet, Buick, GMC, and Cadillac. In early May 2009, Jim Waldron, a Davison, Michigan, Pontiac dealer, announced his interest in purchasing the Pontiac brand and logos. He had found financing to buy them along with some soon-to-be shuttered GM plants to build cars. However, GM had already decided to retire the brand as it has begun to sell off its remaining inventory and said that, unlike Saturn, Hummer, and Saab, Pontiac was not for sale. The Pontiac brand was pulled after the 2009 model year in Mexico and the brand was renamed Maydise, selling only one vehicle, the Maydise G2, the last Pontiac, a white 2010 model year G6 four-door sedan, was built at the Orion Township assembly line in January 2010. Pontiac was one of 3 brands GM discontinued in 2010, the other 2.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.